Would you believe it? Many's the time I've seen full-grown trout what was caught in a draft up and contract double pneumonia and come roaring to the top, hacking and spitting and coughing, then jest lay there on their sides, rolling their eyes at me sad-like and dying like flies. Yep, I mind the time. Please, Mr. McGinnis, one of the disconsolate troopers plaintively began. Now me, Danny went on heedlessly, I'll go up and start a roaring fire and figure out if I can find room to bed you boys down. He paused. Come to think of it, maybe I could even take and fix up a few extra hot drinks. He craned his neck forward, squinting. Or maybe you bus driver fellers ain't allowed to drink spirits. Danny squinted harder. Or is it cab drivers? He paused. Or maybe I hadn't oughtn't to have mentioned it. One of the chilled young troopers turned desperately to the other. Corporal, do you declare us off duty? Absolutely, the shivering corporal replied, grateful for the inspiration. It is so ordered. The two troopers quickly removed their officers' badges and pocketed them. They turned to Danny. There was an imploring look in their eyes. Please, can we stay? They pleaded. Danny stroked his chin thoughtfully with one hand and slowly swung the gurgling jug with the other. He blinked reflectively, carefully weighing the situation. He said. Then he nodded curtly. Yep, he said. The raiders were in. Number 15. The Bourbon Bonanza. Wink Vivian conducted the Chippewa dray line. He drove a team of unruly roan geldings called Cub and Dick. This cub horse was particularly wicked, possessing a Roman nose, permanently flattened ears, sharp yellow teeth, and a knockout punch in all four legs. There was only one man besides Wink who could properly handle his team. That was Buller Bodine. For when Cub Horse kicked at Buller, Buller swiftly kicked him back. When Cub bit Buller, Buller promptly returned the compliment. In this way the two had established a strained sort of rapport based upon mutual respect and fear. Whenever Wink was laid up, his dray business languished until Buller could be coaxed and teased into town to relieve him. Thus it was that when Wink broke his collarbone early in June, Buller reluctantly found himself flailing the wild horses about the streets of Chippewa, imposing discipline with a dray stake, morosely hauling everything from pianos to pincushions. Buller had an unnatural penchant for carrying pianos. He always said a piano was something a man could really get his hands on, but the new dwarfed spinet type filled him with disgust. Nothing short of a full-sized piano ever challenged Buller to flex his biceps willingly. He accordingly contrived to lure at least one small boy onto the dray to deliver loaded trunks and kegs of nails and other paltry things. This saved Buller many weary steps. By judiciously permitting the youngsters to drive Cub and Dick a few blocks, he somehow managed to get himself through the day with a minimum of toil. Dr. Martin's son, Buddy, was a particularly avid customer of Buller's. Buller had met 13-year-old Buddy a few weeks before while delivering a spinet piano, of all things, to his parents' home. Buddy's mother had asked Buller to let the boy ride on the dray with him. Gallant Buller had let Buddy drive Cub and Dick back downtown. Since then, Buller found smiling Buddy awaiting him at the freight depot every morning, teasing to be allowed to drive the horses. One Monday morning, Buller was greatly relieved to find Buddy there, eagerly waiting to help him. This particular morning, Buller was dubious about his ability to deliver even a small crate of powder puffs. He had had a particularly rocky weekend. In addition to his epic hangover, he was flat broke, and so was helpless to put out the fire. He accordingly let Buddy drive the horses all morning, while he sat dangling his fat legs off the side of the dray, intermittently holding his head and moaning. Buddy was in a small boy's heaven. After lunch, Buller's plight grew worse. His huge body was one vast pulse. Little Buddy was touched to see his hero in such travail. "What's the matter, Mr. Buller? Are you sick?" he finally piped up. Buller turned his weary, inflamed eyes on the boy. "Listen, Bud, I'll sell this whole bloody dray for the price of one drink of whiskey." "Is that all?" Buddy said, breaking into a relieved smile. "Then we'll drive straight up to my house right away. My daddy's got ever so many bottles of whiskey in our basement." "What's that?" Buller said. "What's that you just said?" "Daddy keeps it locked in a closet in the basement, but I know where he hides the keys," Buddy ran on. Buller became full of craft and low cunning. He held his head in his plump hands, rocking in elaborate symptoms of anguish. He peeked up at Buddy. "Oh, my poor head. Buddy, are you sure your folks ain't to home?" "Oh, no, Mr. Buller. Mama's at a card party this afternoon, and Daddy's out on his calls." "Make 'em run, Bud, make 'em run," Buller burst out. "Get up, Cub, Dick. Oh, my poor head." Buller's eyes gleamed like shoe buttons as Buddy threw open the wooden closet door and proudly exposed the rows of glistening bottles. Buller took a short step forward and extravagantly folded his plump hands together in front of him in a prayerful attitude, like a husky church tenor about to burst into song during the offertory. He moistened his dry lips, which involuntarily drew up into a wet rosebud pout. The damp basement grew hushed. Buller gulped and puffed out his cheeks. No words came. "There it is, Mr. Buller," Buddy said. "Help yourself. Take any kind you want." Buller slowly turned and regarded Buddy as though he were a stranger. "What's that?" he mumbled. "What'd you say?" "Help yourself," Buddy repeated. Buller incredulously poked a fat finger at his own bosom and then at the closet. "Who? You mean me?" Sure, Buddy said. "But let's hurry before Mama comes home." This electrified Buller, who lurched toward the cupboard only to trample into a lawn-mower, the blades of which spun crazily. Ignoring the clatter and din, he reached toward the bottles. He paused, then he tenderly ran his hand over the nearest bottle. It was a bonded bourbon. He quickly withdrew his hand and put 2 fingers to his lips, gnawing them with indecision. He plucked tentatively at another bottle, and again quickly withdrew his hand. Sore puzzled, he shook his head and glanced quickly at Buddy. Worried, Buddy grabbed the nearest bottle and thrust it into Buller's hands. Lo, it was old cordwood. Buller cradled the bottle in his arms as though it were a baby, gently fondling and caressing it, his breath coming in great and mighty heaves. "Drink it," Buddy ordered. Dr. Martin's son had made his first prescription. Before they left, Buller had sluiced down one bottle of old cordwood, and had still another snuggling under his coat. "Take another one," said Buddy in the grand manner. "Mama's often said she wished Daddy'd get rid of the awful stuff." Smiling in droopy-eyed unconcern, Buller let the boy proudly drive the horses back to the freight depot. Just as Buddy was leaving to run home, he turned to Buller. "Would you like to come back after supper and get some more of Daddy's whiskey, Mr. Buller? I think Mama and Daddy are going to the second show." "Who? Me? Why, are you sure they're going out?" Buller said, his eyes alight with visions of what he had just left. "No," fertile-minded Buddy said, "but I'll tell you what. When they go out, I'll leave a light on in the front room. That's our signal. When you see the parlor light, you'll know the coast is clear. Better make it 5 minutes after 9, just to be on the safe side." "5 after 9 it is," Buller said, solemnly shaking Buddy's hand. "There's just one more thing, Mr. Buller," Buddy added, having a boyish angle of his own. "For curing your illness this way, can I drive Cub and Dick all day tomorrow? Can I?" Precocious was the word for Buddy. "Buddy," Buller said airily, carelessly throwing out a fat hand, "Buddy, for what you done today, you can drive these nags the hull bloody week." "5 after 9, then," Buddy sang out, leaping from the dray. "On the dot," Buller said, clucking Cub and Dick toward the barn. So strange are the devices of fortune that Buller ran into little Matty Hunganen during supper hour at the Chippewa house. Taking Matty aside, he excitedly told him of the bonanza he had struck. "You come on along tonight, Matty, to help me carry the goddamn swag. Here, have a drink." Buller casually produced a quart of old cordwood. After a few generous samples, Matty would have agreed to assist in the abduction of a live tiger. He nodded his head vigorously, a man of great decision. "Yes, sirree, Matty don't care. Matty's all time willing to help a friend." Promptly at 9:05, Buller and Matty stood on Dr. Martin's corner. "See?" Buller whispered hoarsely. "The bloody coast is clear. The light's on in the parlor, just like Buddy and me planned it. Come on, Matty. Boy, oh boy." The two men walked boldly up on Dr. Martin's front porch and rang the bell. They could hear the tortured strains of halting piano music. "See," Buller whispered, "that's Buddy in there practicing on the new piano. Just killin' time waitin' for us." After an interval, the porch light switched on. Matty and Buller stood blinking uncertainly. The front door opened. There stood Mrs. Martin. The blurts of piano music ceased abruptly. Buller swept off his cap and elbowed Matty to remove his. Since the Martins had changed their plans about attending the movies, they had naturally left the light on in the living room. "Good evening, gentlemen." "Oh, it's Mr. Bodine," Mrs. Martin said graciously. "Won't you come in?" Buller glanced at Matty, and Matty glanced at Buller. "Won't you come in?" Mrs. Martin repeated. "No'm," Buller managed to mumble, twisting his cap in his hands. "Isn't there something I can do for you?" Mrs. Martin said. "Doctor is out on a sick call." "Mrs. Martin," Buller began in grievous desperation. His world was reeling. He gulped and rolled his eyes like a dying water-buffalo. "Look, Mrs. Martin," Buller finally blurted, "can Buddy come out and play?" Number 16. Under the spreading banyan tree. The bats flitted and circled in oiled flight over the town square, feeding greedily on the swarming moths and mosquitoes attracted there by the glare of Doc Halliday's medicine show. The banjo-shaped gasoline flares guttered and spat fitfully in the chill summer night's breeze, noisily devouring those swirling insects which had not fallen prey to the bats. Far above the heads of the knot of townspeople the hunting nighthawks wheeled and screeched and endlessly soared. Danny and the boys had gradually worked in near the edge of the platform, their eyes unblinking as they drank in the magic of the medicine show. Dr. Halliday's colored Dixieland ragtime band blared out the final chorus of Alexander's ragtime band from their vapor-steaming horns and twanging banjo, eye-rolling, shivering, devoutly wishing they were back in Dixie. Their music finished, they gathered in gangling haste to the comparative warmth of the changing tent. Doc Halliday, privately nettled but beaming at his retreating assistants, winked broadly at his audience, nodding at its answering chuckle. After the last musician had left, he pushed back his sombrero, removed his cigar, and strode to the front of the platform. Hooking his thumb through his colored vest, he rocked thoughtfully on his booted heels, gazing with sightless eyes over the heads of the waiting people. The crowd grew silent. His was now the misty eye of the healer. Fun was fun, see, but there was the word, and there was the message. There was Banyan. Danny and the boys eagerly absorbed every gesture, every pause of the great Herr Doktor. Here was the persuasive, successful leader of men, the actor, the master of timing, subtle nuance, modulation, mood. With visible effort, the great man withdrew from his tinctured dream, trumpeted into a large silk handkerchief, and began to speak. "Ladies and gentlemen, before we move on to the next act, which follows immediately, we wish to tell our many friends in Chippewa how glad we are to be back again in Michigan's northern peninsula. How much we look forward each year to visiting your invigorating clime, to breathing once again your clean, pine-scented Lake Superior air, that air which spells the greatest of God's gifts." He closed his eyes. "Abundant health." Smiling benevolently, he surveyed the group of boys down in front of him. He put on his Uncle Hal voice, generous, bluff, hearty. "I wonder if one of you fine young boys would help me out tonight? Looks like the members of my band's got to thaw out between acts." The crowd rumbled its appreciation of this vast gold-tooth good humor. It made him one of them, a sturdy, hardy northerner. His roving eyes lit on Buddy Martin's eager, small face. Here, you! Give me your hand, young man. Tonight you're going to intern under old Doc Halliday." He reached down and grabbed Buddy's helplessly upraised arm and lifted him, upsy-daisy, onto the platform. Buddy stood blinking down at his giggling, envious comrades, his face surging with color. Doc Halliday reached out his big palm to Buddy. "My name's Doc Halliday, pardner. Put her there. What's yours?" "Buddy Martin, sir." "How old are you?"
13, sir,"
Buddy answered. "Don't sir me, bud. Now suppose we get to work. Would you reach in that there carton, please, and fetch me a bottle of my life-giving medicine, Banyan?"
"Yes, sir,"
Buddy said, scrambling to the carton, glad to hide in action the delightful terror of his embarrassment. He rummaged in the carton and drew out a tall bottle of inky black fluid and handed it to Doc Halliday. Doc lay the bottle in the palm of one big hand and patted it with the other. Lovingly he patted it. He looked out over the spellbound audience. Buddy stood there, spindly in his corduroy knee pants and red-knitted pullover sweater, drinking in the words of the great man along with the pungent, delicious aroma of raw gasoline from the lamps. "Good friends of Chippewa, due to the scarcity of the rare and exotic ingredients which go into banyan, we are, alas, not able to offer you as much of our health-giving medicine this year as we have in the past." Doc Halliday again favored the crowd with his broad gold-carat smile. "And so we regret that we must restrict each lucky person to one bottle of banyan, one only. Our supply is limited. But the quality is even better than ever, and the price remains the same, $1 per bottle. Yes, sir, ladies and gentlemen, banyan is still only $1 silver per bottle, just 10 silver dimes. His voice boomed on rapidly now in a kind of chant on sure and steady ground. "Folks, do you ever wake up in the morning with spots before your eyes, a pain in the small of your back, and a strong and highly offensive urine? Then take banyan. Here is the medicine that rids you of your aches and pains, releases the internal juices, tunes up the system, unclogs the human pipes and valves. In a word, banyan, 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 made from the roots of that ancient tree which flowers only in the Holy Land." The wretched, shivering Dixieland ban, hearing its cue, again lined up under the flapping canopy of moths. The voice of medicine rolled glibly on, gathering speed. "Banyan, that age-old remedy blessed by the wise men of yore. Banyan, just $1 silver, 10 silver dimes. Banyan cures or our money's yours. Who's the first lucky person? Here, thank you, sir. Take her away, Dixieland. Who's the next? Right, and 4 or 5. Another carton, buddy boy. Banyan, banyan. A high look. Step right up, ladies and gentlemen. Ring the cane you ring, the cane you carry away. Get banyan, that soothing elixir of life. Columbus took a chance, why not you? Banyan, banyan. Da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da, tooted the Dixieland band. Danny was fidgeting nervously with the drawstring of his buckskin purse. When the band subsided, he caught the great doctor's eye. "Look, mister, is that there stuff any good for a bum's stomach? My ulcer's been flaring up something awful today." Oddly enough, peptic ulcers were right down Doc Halliday's alley. "Listen, friend," he boomed genially,
Did you ever hear tell of one of them ancient Egyptians or old biblical fellas that ever had the bellyache, did you?
No, Danny was obliged to agree. I don't mind that I ever did.
Ah, of course not. And why?
Doc's question was purely rhetorical.
Because every mother's son of 'em was raised, mind you, on banyan. They drank gallons of it, that's why,
Doc triumphantly concluded. Danny fumbled in his buckskin purse. "I'll take a bottle, then," he said, handing up a wrinkled dollar bill and receiving a bottle of precious banyan from the hot hands of the great healer. Danny could scarcely wait for the medicine show to end, so anxious was he to get at his bottle of magical banyan. After the Dixieland band had tootled its last tune and the gasoline flares had been extinguished by the great doctor himself, Buller and the rest of the boys insisted upon repairing to Charlie's place. They'd still take old cordwood. But Danny shook his head and resolutely scurried down the side streets to the Chippewa house, hugging his bottle of banyan to him like a Notre Dame quarterback making a sweeping end run against Army. Danny hurriedly got the key to room 205, the bridal suite, from the sleepy night clerk, and in a trice he had locked himself in his room, donned his nightshirt and sleeping cap, and was owlishly regarding himself in the rippled dresser mirror. He held the open bottle of banyan in his hand. "Here's bumps, Mr. McGinnis," Danny toasted himself, tilting the bottle to his lips. What was good enough for the pharaohs of Egypt was good enough for Daniel Wellington McGinnis. Gurgle, 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 went the banyan. "Blah!" went Danny when the bottle was finally drained, wrinkling his nose in distaste. Danny stood looking at himself in the mirror. His lips began to twitch. See? The ancient elixir was already doing its work. Danny's hands began to moisten. He gingerly placed the empty banyan bottle on the dresser. Presently he began making a series of involuntary gulps, yawning and gasping and chumping his jaws like an undersized ostrich that had but recently swallowed an oversized orange. Then his cheeks began to blow out and in, rhythmically, convulsively, like those of an enchanted musician playing an invisible tuba. Danny stood helplessly regarding his remarkable symptoms. "It's releasing the internal juices," he whispered hoarsely, wildly quoting the great Herr Doctor. "It's just unclogging the pipes and valves." When Buller and the boys finally weaved their way over to the Chippewa house and up the carpeted stairs, a strange apparition greeted their eyes. A sleepwalker was groping his way down the hall and into the men's washroom, arms and fingers extended, walking rigid and stiff-legged like a robot, or possibly even like the animated mummy of an Egyptian pharaoh. "It's the old man hisself," Buller whispered in awe. "It's old Danny staggering around like a poisoned pup. I'll bet the old tightwad's gone and floored every last drop of his banyan." Late the next afternoon there was a knock on the door of Doc Halliday's room in the Chippewa house. The doctor went to the door and found a wan and shaken Danny, yellowed and jaundiced from his bout with banyan. Danny glimpsed an uncorked bottle on the bureau which, strangely enough, resembled old cordwood much more than it did banyan. "What can I do for you, chum?" Doc demanded, eager to return to his bureau. "I want my money back," Danny began plaintively. "The face is familiar, but I don't seem to remember the walrus mustache," Doc said wearily, with a fine note of sarcasm.
"The goddamn vile stuff near kilt me," Danny went on doggedly. "I want my money back, like what you promised." All of Doc's urbanity seemed to have deserted him since the evening before. The pharaohs of Egypt had been insulted. The fair name of Banyan had been sullied. He was not amused. "Listen, Billy Whiskers," he said, "go away. Go peddle your rutabagas." Danny found himself staring at the closed door. He heard the lock click. He backed away from the door and lowered his head for the charge. Just then another spasm of pain caught him. "Oh!" he moaned, clutching his stomach and helplessly clenching his fist at the closed door. "If you hadn't a-went and poisoned me, I'd jar your uppers loose and swap 'em for your lowers. Billy Whiskers, is it? We'll bloody well see about that." That night a large banyan-bent crowd gathered at the feet of the great Doc Halliday. Doc was in glowing good humor. It was a warm evening, and the grinning Dixieland Band was doing right well with St. Louis blues. Next would come a soft shoe dance, then another selection by the band. Then would be released the magic flood of banyan. A block away, Danny entered Jabber Gleason's shooting gallery. Except for the disconsolate proprietor, the place was deserted. All of Jabber's customers were over being bedazzled by banyan. Danny had a cold, fanatical look in his eye.
"Listen, Jab," he said rapidly, "I want to borrow my favorite .22 rifle and 3 shells. Make 'em shorts, just for 10 minutes. Come on, Jab, I gotta hurry." Danny was one of Jabber's good customers and best shots, but Jabber didn't like the feverish look in his eye. "Look, Danny," he said, "you know you're welcome to the whole bloody joint, but what you aimin' to shoot? You look kind of sick and wild like tonight, Dan. I am sick," Danny said quietly, "but I'm aimin' to save some of those other bloody damn fools from getting sick like me." He became full of guile. "And I'll have this rat's nest of yours chuck full of cash customers in no time at all. Wait and see. All I want is to shoot down a goddamn tree." "A tree?" Jabber echoed. "Yep, a banyan tree. Ever hear tell of one? No, I figured not. Here, man, hand me the bloody gun before it's too late." Danny grabbed the .22 and the 3 shells from a reluctant and fearful Jabber. He quickly broke down the rifle and tucked it under his jacket. "See you in 10 minutes, Jab," he called over his shoulder. Jabber glumly stroked his chin and pondered the punishment which would be the lot of an accessory before the fact to first-degree murder. Back at the medicine show, Doc Halliday was loudly extolling the manifold virtues of banyan. He held the first bottle of the evening in his hands. So intent was the crowd on the glowing words of this traveling Hippocrates that no one noticed a bald head quickly peek over the parapet of the roof of the city hall, directly across from the town square. The 2 spitting gasoline flares lighted up the target nicely. "It's made from that ancient tree which flowers only in the Holy Land," Doc boomed on. "Banyan cures or our money's yours. Who's the first?" What's that?" Ping! Something had sharply struck the round gasoline drum of one of the flares. Lo, it was punctured. Spang! Went the gasoline tank on the remaining flare. Raw gasoline alternately sprayed, spurted, and dribbled from both flares down on the platform, up in the air, and out at the hastily retreating crowd.
"Come back! Come back!"
Doc Halliday wildly implored the waning crowd, leaning over the edge of his gasoline-soaked platform.
"Look!"
he beseeched, waving a bottle of Banyan.
"We're gonna have a sale on Banyan tonight. 50 cents for one bottle, 3 for $1.
Doc continued to shout his startling bargain as he held a bottle of Banyan aloft for the crowd to see. Plink! The inky juice of the root of the ancient banyan tree ran down Doc's upraised arm. He stood quizzically studying the jagged pattern of the broken bottle in his hand, just as the gasoline flares spluttered, flared up, and then died away into utter darkness. "Billy Whiskers," Doc whispered, grinning ruefully to himself in the dark. Danny deftly edged his way through the crowd which thronged Jabber Gleason's shooting gallery. He handed grinning Jabber a long package wrapped in newspaper.
"'Tis a fine rainbow trout for your Friday dinner tomorrow," Danny shouted above the spat of the rifles. "I just caught him."
He turned to leave.
"Don't you want to stay and try your aim at a flock of clay pipes?"
Jabber shouted back, tendering Danny a loaded rifle.
"No thanks, Jabber."
Danny dolefully drew in his cheeks and winked at Jabber.
"I'm just a sick old man, and anyway my eyes ain't what they used to be. If it's all the same, I'll just step right over to Charlie's place and get my medicine. And it ain't banyan. Good night, Jabber." "Good night, Dan. Thanks for the fish."
Number 17. Daniel in the Lion's Den. Chippewa was planning a homecoming celebration for the 4th of July, the occasion being the 75th anniversary of the incorporation of the town. The Chippewa Common Council had generously appropriated money for the celebration. The Hematite Weekly carried banner headlines on the event. "Gala Parade, 3 bands, 3, lavish floats, prizes, come one, come all, don't miss it." The residents of Chippewa were helpless slaves to that gentle and harmless form of exhibitionism known as a parade. Bearded psychiatrists might have spun fine theories to prove that this innocent form of ostentation sprang from nothing but a thwarted love of pageantry and display, that the dwellers in this rugged area, where it was said there were 9 months winter and 3 months bad sleighing, simply couldn't resist a periodic expression of communal glee, especially during the fleeting and golden months of summer. In any event, this was to be the finest parade Chippewa had ever seen. Every iron mine, business house, school, church, and fraternal lodge in town agreed to be represented by a float depicting some event of world or local significance. The floats could represent any event, serious or humorous, current or historical. This afforded a broad scope for the imagination. The town's merchants gladly contributed prizes. Tim Hughes, a barrel of flour for the best historical float. M.A. Kahn, a natty new blue serge suit for the best mining float. J.J. Leffler, 3 hams for the most humorous float. Fred Brastad, a live pig for the best float depicting a religious theme. The sons of St. Hubert had their eyes glued on the live pig. The Sons was a fraternal lodge composed largely of Cornish miners. Its float committee publicly announced its entry simply as the Mystery Float. This naturally caused the townspeople to speculate for days on the probable nature of the offering by the sons of St. Hubert. Not a soul outside of the sons knew that the chairman of the lodge's float committee had paid a secret visit to Danny McGinnis out at Hungry Hollow. There, in the dead of night, he had engaged old Danny and his wolf pelt to play the part of Daniel in the lion's den. It was abundantly evident that Fred Brastad's live pig was not long for this world. "You mean your lodge wants me to wear this here wolf skin and play the part of Daniel in the lion's den?" Danny again asked Jan Tregambo, dubiously rubbing his bald head. "'Zactly, partner, 'zactly," Jan answered pertly. "All I gotta do is stand in the goddamn float and ride down Main Street and say nothing?" Danny queried. "'Zactly," Jan agreed. "And all alone, you say?" asked Danny, fearful that he might have to share the spotlight. Jan swallowed hard before answering. "You'll be the only bloody human in the float," he said. "Where you aim to get the lions?" Danny asked. "No, don't worry your head 'bout that, partner. We'll tend to the bloody lions," Jan answered airily. "How much you aim to pay me for being this here Daniel?" $30.50. $5 of what will be for your chum Buller to haul the float with. He'll drive Wink Vivian's dray horses, Cub and Dick. Mr. Vivian's the honorable head of our lodge, you know." "What's the extra 50 cents for?" Danny asked. "For the white tennis slippers," Jan promptly answered. "Tennis slippers? Why in hell tennis slippers?" "Well, we have figured out everything we have," Jan modestly admitted. "We figured you'd need to have something on your bloody feet in there with all them lions. Something fitting also for Daniel to have on his feet on such a sacred occasion. So we fixed on tennis slippers. You can buy of 'em to size for about 50 cents at Will Traithen's variety store. Reason they ain't donated is because Will Traithen don't happen to be a lodge brother, you know. What say, partner?" Delighted, Danny still pretended to be dubious of the proposal. He thoughtfully combed out his mustaches with his fingers. He said. Jan played his final trump. "In addition to the money we shall pay you, when our float wins the prize, as it most certainly shall, you shall have that too. It's a live pig, you know, for the best religious float. The sons of St. Hubert ain't ones to hold back, they ain't. What say, partner?" Danny looked Jan squarely in the eye. "I ain't been much of a hand lately at this here religion business," he said. "But for you boys I'll bloody well do it, lions and all." Danny put out his hand. "Put her there, partner." "Pretty," Jan said, clasping Danny's hand.